Holy smokes, you guys, the US government just ordered the Pentagon to start using lethal force against the drug cartels. This is a gigantic change because up until now, the US military has only been authorized to creep on the cartel using surveillance flights and drones.
President Trump has quietly signed a directive greenlighting US military force outside of the United States. The target? Powerful cartels.
This is not a drill, you guys. This information is coming straight from the New York Times and their sources inside the White House. And the plan has already been in motion for the past couple of weeks. But I think this is actually just one part of a series of sweeping steps that have been happening simultaneously across the Western Hemisphere, including a massive federal operation right here on US soil that we're going to get into. What we're witnessing is the most direct, lethal action ever taken against the cartels by the American military, which will have huge consequences for multiple different countries, including Venezuela, as we'll soon see. Today, we're going to examine how many US troops are being deployed and where they're going. They've already been ordered there, what this change means on both the tactical and diplomatic level, and why this military action might not look like the kind of conventional strike that we would suspect. Today's sponsor is World of Tanks. I play it when I get done with work every day because I only have a little bit of time each night to play games, and it lets me jump straight into the action online. Within seconds, I'm blowing up enemy tanks. World of Tanks is a free-to-play PC game that has over 800 main battle tanks in its arsenal that range from light to heavy, even self-propelled artillery. The game leaves it up to me how I want to play. Personally, I have absolutely zero patience, so I go in guns blazing. My favorite tactic is flanking the enemy. There's always new ways to play though in these massive 15 versus 15 matches that play out over 40 different maps. You'll fight through fields and cities. Whether you're a novice or a pro, you can jump straight in and experience the same thrill as the 100 million other players in the game. All of them are like us, way too passionate about main battle tanks, and probably a little bit attracted to them as well. Click the link in the description now and use my invite code COMBAT to jump in. New players get 250,000 credits and 7 days premium access, the Cromwell B British Premium Medium Tank, and a few of these other rental tanks. Existing players get 3 days premium access and 7-day rental of the premium tank Centurion Mark 5-1. Just click the link in my description and I'll see you on the battlefield. The US military just ordered 4,000 Marines and sailors to the waters around the Caribbean islands in Latin America, so like around here-ish. And they are rolling deep, you guys. They have the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit is going there on board an Iwo Jima amphibious landing ship, which is basically a mini aircraft carrier with fighter jets, attack helicopters, landing craft that can bring armored vehicles on shore. U.S. officials confirmed a nuclear attack submarine, several Navy destroyers, and a guided missile cruiser are also all going on this mission that's designed to ramp up efforts to combat drug cartels. I'm honestly not even sure what a Mark 48 torpedo from an attack submarine would do to a cartel go-fast boat, but we may soon find out on Funker 530.
News Nation pressing President Trump on reports that he secretly signed a directive ordering the Pentagon to use military force against drug cartels labeled as foreign terrorist organizations.
Up until now, the Navy has had to work through the Coast Guard to legally take any lethal action or make any arrests. Officials say the Department of Defense is now drawing up multiple options for kinetic action against the cartel. What will that look like? According to the Washington Post, quote, discussions have ranged from using Navy destroyers to launch missiles at cartel leaders or infrastructure to partnering more closely with Mexican authorities to target the criminal organizations, end quote. That is, of course, in reference to building barracks and safe houses in Mexico with their authorization to allow American special operators to work out of. That would give them the capability to run killer capture missions against targets involved in the drug trade.
In May, the United States and Mexican forces raided 3 major drug labs in Sinaloa, seizing fentanyl and chemical precursors, a rare strike on the cartel's own turf.
When you hear a military officer use the word kinetic action, it's not some kind of 9th grade scientific physics experiment. It's just a Pentagon-approved euphemism for killing people. The Washington Post goes on to say a U.S. official familiar with the issue said military strikes would be audacious and potentially unlikely to get approval from the president. What that means is they're signaling there are limits to what they're currently willing to do with the rules of engagement. Over the past few months, 2 U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke destroyers were quietly deployed to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, the Gulf of America. I can't win here. I'm cringe either way I go. The point is, this is historically a really unusual move to deploy destroyers to the Gulf. It was done in anticipation of strikes being ordered against the cartel, because that would put those destroyers within striking distance of cartel drug labs and distribution infrastructure with up to 96 Tomahawk land attack missiles. We're still working on developing a missile variant that attacks the demand for drugs, though. This new order now gives the justification for direct military assaults both at sea and on foreign soil against cartels. However, according to the publicly available diplomatic messages from both Mexico's president and the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, who's Ronald Johnson, they both claim this will not be a conventional military operation. Ambassador Johnson said on X in a statement, quote, "This is not about the United States acting alone. It's about building a joint, unshakable front with Mexico to defend our citizens, dismantle the cartel's networks, and ensure that the only people who need to fear for their future are those who profit from murder, addiction, and chaos," end quote. It sounds like something a CIA spook would want me to think. Oh, wait. Ronald Johnson actually did work for the CIA in his past, and his background in the intelligence community in the United States has been taken as an indicator of the U.S. intention to use covert military action and paramilitary groups against the cartel. Mexico's President Sheinbaum made some diplomatic statements in response, saying, quote, "The United States is not sending its military to Mexico. We cooperate, we collaborate, but there will be no invasion. We're ruling this out absolutely." In April 2025, the White House asked President Sheinbaum, Mexico, if she would be cool with the U.S. sending troops across the border to give a helping hand in combat and pull triggers against the cartel, and she said, "Thanks, but no thanks." The diplomatic messaging are careful, though. I think it's worded in a way to say that there won't be conventional operations, which leaves some ambiguity over whether they would object to covert actions. This is the kind of phrasing that officials often use historically when they're hinting at intelligence operations. But I think it's easy to miss some of the actual targets of these sweeping changes. Okay, so often when we think about these drug cartels, we think about the United States and Mexico naturally. But the interesting thing, I think, is that these new orders are actually targeting a different country that we rarely think or talk about when it comes to the cartel, and that is Venezuela.
Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles, Trinidad, and MS-13.
Because two things just happened. First, recently on July 25th, 2025, the U.S. government designated the Venezuelan cocaine cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. And you might think, what's the big deal? This year in 2025, the U.S. designated at least 8 different cartels as terrorists, already starting in February. But there's actually a major distinction here. The Venezuelan de los Soles cartel is alleged to be a direct arm of the Venezuelan government, made up of a network of Venezuelan military officers and political elite. It started in the 1990s with traffickers in Colombia bribing Venezuela border guards, which escalated from there into being accused of being a narco-terrorist state-run enterprise.
And a $50 million bounty on Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, accused of running a cartel from his presidential palace.
Unlike with Mexico, the U.S. official stance is that the cartel is directly led by Venezuelan leader Maduro himself, and that his whole government is a narco-terrorist state. This has been the position of the United States for many years. De los Soles is accused of having protection thanks to their ties to senior Venezuelan government officials. Their name allegedly has a direct reference to this. It means Cartel of the Suns, sun being a reference that comes from the insignia of the Venezuelan military general epaulets. So in some ways, the accusation here is that it's kind of like Vagner or Blackwater. It's like a secret arm of the Venezuelan government, but except instead of being a PMC, it's a private cartel organization. Unlike Mexico, which is diplomatically seen as an ally and a partner, Venezuela is very different. They're seen as an adversarial nation. McDermott, co-founder of Inside Crime, said, quote, "The difference in Venezuela compared to Mexico and Colombia is that within Venezuela, a good percentage of the business is managed within the state," end quote. Evidence for this comes from defector testimony from multiple sources and evidence of the Venezuelan military flights that have been caught smuggling narcotics abroad to places like Spain and America. What all of this means taken together is that the risk calculus for the United States is different with Venezuela. They don't get the white glove treatment that's gone there. Operations there wouldn't be seen as a breach of an alliance with America's #1 trading partner like Mexico. Actions against Venezuela is seen as actions against the hostile state. This deployment location is revealing because it's in close proximity to Venezuela. This is where a lot of illicit substances travel through from Venezuela on its way to Mexico and in the Caribbean island chain to the United States. Now, I'm not much of a fishing expert myself. I find fishing is something that takes a lot of patience and requires a kind of inner peace that I may never achieve. But what this mission sounds like to me is a fishing expedition to see if the cartel will take the bait and touch America's boats. By reading the official FTO announcement itself, we can see exactly where the US government's head is at here. In it, they state, the De Los Sols cartel, which has provided material support to Aragua, Tren, and Sinaloa cartel. Based in Venezuela, the Sols cartel is led by Nicolas Maduro, who has corrupted Venezuela's government institutions, including parts of the army, intelligence services, the legislature, and the judiciary, in order to facilitate the cartel's activities in the drug trafficking to the United States, and quote, translation, the US government is not fans. Secondly, the White House announced a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, for violating US narcotics law.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro issues a warning to the United States that an attack against him could be, quote, the beginning of the end of the American empire.
On face value, this sounds kind of nuts. It reads like the US is offering a Wild West-style wanted dead or alive poster for the sitting president of another country. For context, that's twice what was offered compared to the reward to capture Osama bin Laden. You guys, I've got a tip. He's in Venezuela. Can I get the reward money now? But on the real, why would they offer a reward like that? This is widely believed to be a kind of psyop. That kind of money could lead to a coup or instability in his inner circle. It's like putting a price tag on regime change. In order to collect that reward, though, it would have to be someone with direct access, his senior military officers, for instance. The U.S. has done this before, putting money on Saddam Hussein, Latin American leaders like Noriega in the 1980s. There was a $1 million bounty placed on his head, and that indictment was used as part of the justification for military intervention in Operation Just Cause in 1989 with the invasion of Panama. However, I think it's unlikely that this would involve overt U.S. troops deployed to Venezuela for a number of reasons. One being Venezuela is far larger than Panama. They have a population of 30 million people versus Panama's 2.5 million. So what is more likely? It's a plausible, deniable way to call for a government to be overthrown, to create the conditions for a coup without actually cooing. It's a psyop. It plants the idea that loyalty to the leader can be monetized by betraying him. It's the increased paranoia in that inner circle. It's not out of the realm of possibility. The US government paid a total of $30 million for the capture of Uday and Qusay Hussein in 2003. Supposedly a cousin dropped a dime on them. If someone put a bounty out on me, I'd be looking around thinking, which one of my friends is going to sell me out for $50 million? That's why I don't have any friends, so no one can even threaten to betray me. Why are the US and Venezuela at such odds? Since 2020, Maduro is accused of ending democracy, fully grasping power in Venezuela during that 2024 election. Practically speaking, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, I believe more than even Saudi Arabia. And they maintain state control of it all, which the US says Maduro uses as a political weapon. From a national security point of view, Venezuela hosts Russian military advisors. They have major arms sales programs with Russia, and they've granted port access to Russian warships. They've had bombers there. They have S-400 anti-air weapon operating in the Western Hemisphere here, and China heavily invests in Venezuela's infrastructure. Iran sends oil tankers, military technology, as well as Quds Force operatives, which is like their version of the CIA. Venezuela is seen as a foothold from Washington's perspective, as their main strategic enemies are allowed to go there. So the confrontation with Venezuela turns from this kind of counter-cartel mission in the Western Hemisphere into a potential flashpoint with other major nations. From Venezuela's point of view, the U.S. stance is seen as hostile interference and that they're messing with their sovereignty. Venezuela's government argues that the U.S. has a long, troubled history of intervention in Latin America, and that this is just an extension of that, and the failed war on drugs is what they claim. Venezuela's public opinion is split between a faction that supports Maduro and a faction that opposes him. But according to what we're hearing from insiders close to the White House, the plan is to totally obliterate the Venezuelan cartel's operations in the Western Hemisphere, which hints at the scope of this mission. However, one of the biggest challenges is that the US military lacks the kind of relationships that the FBI and DEA have developed with Mexican authorities since the 1980s. To try to fix this, the Pentagon recently established something new that's called the Joint Service Interagency Advisory Group. This is a combination of US Special Forces operators that work alongside experts from agencies like the FBI, DEA, that have an on-the-ground presence in Mexico. Wait a second. Isn't this just the plot to that movie Sicario? The reason this was set up is because the FBI has offices all across Mexico and on-the-ground contacts there. Direct action missions in Latin America are not unheard of. And there's a recent history of it being used, and it's often been a cautionary tale. The DEA ran tactical teams in Honduras in Operation Anvil in 2012. This is kind of like a SWAT team, but for the DEA, and they operated outside the United States against drug runners. It was a 90-day joint operation working alongside Honduras police, but there were 3 controversial deadly force incidents that triggered international backlash after innocent people were killed. The operation is a good example of how a poorly planned use of force can have unintended consequences if it's not fully thought out. And this led to the U.S. Department of State reviewing where they found that the poor operational planning and no defined rules of engagement were major reasons for this happening. Ultimately, the DEA tactical teams were ordered to leave the foreign country, and they were soon shut down and disbanded after that. The current campaign is not limited to foreign operations. On the U.S. side of the border, the Department of Defense has expanded National Defense Area to designate nearly 1/3 of the southern border now. These zones give U.S. troops the power to detain people who cross illegally and bypass these traditional restrictions on military involvement in law enforcement. So basically about 1/3 of the border with Mexico has now been militarized. So there's over 7,000 troops who are patrolling hundreds of miles in Texas, New Mexico, and soon in Arizona. There's more than 50 Stryker armored vehicles now patrolling the desert borderlands. More than 1,400 migrants have already been charged with trespassing on military territory. These actions have choked off the flow of drugs and immigrants into the United States, and this crackdown has strangled the cartel funds that, and major arrests against top leadership of the cartel in Mexico have led to this massive cartel civil war that's been going on over the past few months. So far, the results appear to be that the 2 cartels are now joining forces with one another to try to survive in a different form in the future. Parallel to this militarization of the border in the United States and Mexico is something called Operation Atlarge, and this is something that you've probably seen increasingly in the news, and I assume we will hear more about going forward. It's the largest coordinated immigration enforcement effort since the 1940s. It involves more than 5,000 federal law enforcement personnel drawn from multiple different agencies, 3,000 from ICE agents, including another 1,800 from Homeland Security, then Justice Department employees, U.S. Marshal Services, and Border Protection officers. They all have been put together, and the plan also supposedly includes a request for up to 21,000 National Guard troops to support these ICE operations. This is the largest federal operation in the interior of the country. By looking at the U.S. military leadership who are responsible for drawing up these plans that we just talked about, we can get a pretty good indication of what may happen, I think. The new commander of U.S. forces in Central and South America, Admiral Halsey, who took over in November 2024, he recently made a long statement to Congress outlining where he stands on strategy. The highlights, I think, are when he said, quote, "The United States of America and the many nations and territories that comprise Latin America and the Caribbean are bound together by rich cultural tradition, family bonds, economic endeavor, and enduring commitment to democratic principles." He goes on to say that he believes the greatest threat is actually not the cartel, but Russian and Chinese action in Latin America. Quote, "These authoritarian regimes continue their methodical incursion into the region using varying tools toward separate end states." He says we can stem this tide by standing together shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners. Our partners want to work with the United States, but to maintain their trust and confidence, they must feel and see our presence and commitment before it's too late, end quote. All of his statements stress the importance of working in partnership and acting with permission of foreign nations. I couldn't find anything in either of their public statements supporting unilateral military action in Latin America, That doesn't mean that it's not possible they would do something like that, but it's always worth looking at who's in charge of the actual day-to-day operations and if that ever changes. And all of the media sources say that the president has signed a secret directive here and that it could have either been a presidential finding for covert action or it could have been a presidential memorandum, which is a way to issue top secret sensitive missions in the military. From here, officers go on to create con plans, and they're not just ways for them to justify them having jobs. Those are then turned into operational plans, which are put into action. All of these stories taken together, I think something becomes clear here. What is emerging is a multi-front campaign, militarized buffer zones on U.S. soil, mass immigration raids supported by an unprecedented number of federal agents, and in some cases the military, like in Los Angeles. And there are expanded covert intelligence collection over foreign territory, and now directive to conduct overt kinetic strikes. What we're seeing is a campaign in the Western Hemisphere unlike anything we've seen in recent history. It's being run simultaneously at home and abroad, with the military and intelligence community operating at the forefront. And remember, if you're looking for a way to relieve stress each day, why not give World of Tanks a shot? It's free to play on the PC. Just click my link in the description or the pinned comment below to get some cool bonuses with it. If you want more exclusive content, you can go to cappyarmy.com for all the full show notes and sources that are available for this episode. Check out one of these episodes, though, on the Cartel if you want to see some more coverage on that. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy, ending transmission.